Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Reading Corner with MooseChangerPat. That's me, in case you're wondering. Today we are reading Chapter 4 of Magician's Gambit by David Eddings, Book 3 of the Belgariad. And as always, you should buy the original book to support the original work. Chapter 4. When they rose the next morning, at the first pale hint of light was appearing on the eastern horizon, there was a touch of silvery frost on the ground, and a thin scum of ice around the edges of the spring at the bottom of the glen. Sinedra, who had gone to the spring to wash her face, lifted a leaf-thin shard from the water and stared at it. "It's much colder up in the mountains," Garion told her as he belted on his sword. "I'm aware of that," she replied loftily. "Forget it," he said shortly and stamped away, muttering. They rode down out of the mountains in the bright morning sunlight, moving at a steady trot. As they rounded a shoulder of outcropping rock, they saw the broad basin that had once been Maragore, the district of the Marags, stretching out below them. The meadows were a dusty autumn green, and the streams and lakes sparkled in the sun. A tumbled ruin, looking tiny in the distance, gleamed far out on the plain. Princess Sinedra, Garion noticed, kept her eyes averted, refusing even to look. Not far down the slope below them, a cluster of crude huts and lopsided tents lay in a steep gully where a frothy creek had cut down through the rocks and gravel. Dirt streets and paths wandered crookedly up and down the sides of the gully, and a dozen or so ragged-looking men were hacking somewhat dispiritingly at the creek bank with picks and mattocks, turning the water below the shabby settlement a muddy yellow-brown. "A town?" Dernick asked. "Out here?" "Not exactly a town," Wolf replied. "The men in these settlements sift gravel and dig up the stream banks, looking for gold." "Is there gold here?" Silk asked quickly, his eyes bright. "A little," Wolf said. "Probably not enough to make it worth anyone's time to look for it." "Why do they bother, then?" Wolf shrugged. "Who knows?" Mandaralin and Barrack took the lead, and they moved down the rocky trail toward the settlement. As they approached, two men came out of the huts with rusty swords in their hands. One, a thin, unshaven man with a high forehead, wore a greasy Tolnadran jerkin. The other, much taller and bulkier, was dressed in the ragged tunic of an Erendish serf. "That's far enough," the Tolnadran shouted. "We don't let armed men come in here until we know what their business is." "You're blocking the trail, friend," Barrack advised him. "You might find that unhealthy." "One shout from me will bring up 50 armed men," the Tolnadran warned. "Don't be an idiot, Reldo," the big errand told him. "That one with all the steel on him is a Mimbrate knight. There aren't enough men on the whole mountain to stop him if he decides to go through here." He looked warily at Mandaralin. "Your intentions, Sir Knight?" he asked respectfully. "We are but following the trail," Mandaralin replied. "We have no interest in thy community." The errand grunted. "That's good enough for me. Let them pass, Reldo." He slid his sword back under his rope belt. "What if he's lying?" Reldo retorted. "What if they're here to steal our gold?" "What gold, you jackass?" the errand demanded with contempt. "There isn't enough gold in the whole camp to fill a thimble. And Mimbrate knights don't lie. If you want to fight with him, go ahead. After it's over, we'll scoop up what's left of you and dump you in a hole someplace." "You've got a bad mouth, Barrig," Reldo observed darkly. "And what do you plan to do about it?" The Tolnadran glared at the larger man, and then turned and walked away, muttering curses. Barrig laughed harshly, then turned back to Mandaralin. "Come ahead, Sir Knight," he advised. "Reldo's all mouth. You don't have to worry about him." Mandaralin moved forward at a walk. "Not a long way from home, my friend." Barrig shrugged. "There wasn't anything in Erendia to keep me, and I had a misunderstanding with my lord over a pig. When he started talking about hanging, I thought I'd like to try my luck in a different country." "Seems like a sensible decision," Barrack laughed. Barrig winked at him. "The trail goes right on down to the creek," he told them. "Then up the other side behind those shacks. The men over there are Nadraks, but the only one who might give you any trouble is Tarlek. He got drunk last night, though, so he's probably still sleeping it off." A vacant-eyed man in Sandarian clothing shambled out of one of the tents. Suddenly, he lifted his face and howled like a dog. Barig picked up a rock and shied it at him. The Sandar dodged the rock and ran yelping behind one of the shacks. "One of these days I'm going to do him a favor and stick a knife in him," Barig remarked sourly. "He bays at the moon all night long." "What's the problem?" Barig asked. Barig shrugged. "Crazy. He thought he could make a dash into Maragore and pick up some of the gold before the ghost caught him. He was wrong." "What did they do to him?" Dernick asked, his eyes wide. "Nobody knows," Barig replied. "Every so often somebody gets drunk or greedy and thinks he can get away with it. It wouldn't do any good. Even if the ghost didn't catch you, anybody coming out is stripped immediately by his friends. Nobody gets to keep any gold he brings out, so why bother?" "You've got a charming society here," Silk observed wryly. Barig laughed. "It suits me. It's better than decorating a tree in my lord's apple orchard back in Arendia." He scratched absently at one armpit. "I guess I'd better go do some digging," he sighed. "Good luck." He turned and started toward one of the tents. "Let's move along," Wolf said quietly. "These places tend to get rowdy as the day wears on." "You seem to know quite a bit about them, Father," Aunt Paul noticed. "They're good places to hide," he replied. "Nobody asks any questions. I've needed to hide a time or two in my life." "I wonder why." They started along the dusty street toward the slapped-together shacks and patched tents, moving down toward the roiling creek. "Wait!" someone called from behind. A scruffy-looking Drasdian was running after them, waving a small leather pouch. He caught up with them, puffing. "Why didn't you wait?" he demanded. "What do you want?" Silk asked him. "I'll give you 50 pennyweight of fine gold for the girl," the Drasdian panted, waving his leather sack again. Marandarolan's face went bleak, and his hand moved toward his sword hilt. "Why don't you let me deal with this, Mandarolan?" Silk suggested mildly, swinging down from his saddle. Sinedra's expression had first registered shock, then outrage. She appeared almost on the verge of explosion before Garion reached her and put his hand on her arm. "Watch," he told her softly. "How dare—" "Hush, just watch. Silk's going to take care of it." "That's a pretty paltry offer," Silk said, his fingers flicking idly. "She's still young," the other Drasdian pointed out. "She obviously hasn't had much training yet. Which one of you owns her?" "We'll get to that in a moment," Silk replied. "Surely you can make a better offer than that." "It's all I've got," the scruffy man answered plaintively, waving his fingers. "And I don't want to go into partnership with any of the brigands in this place. I'd never get to see any of the profits." Silk shook his head. "I'm sorry," he refused. "It's out of the question. I'm sure you can see our position." Sinedra was making strangled noises. "Be quiet," Garion snapped. "This isn't what it seems to be." "What about the other one?" the scruffy man suggested, sounding desperate. "Surely 50 pennyweight's a good price for her." Without warning, Silk's fist lashed out, and the scruffy Drasdian reeled back from the apparent blow. His hand flew to his mouth, and he began to spew curses. "Run him off, Mandarolan," Silk said quite casually. The grim-faced knight drew his broadsword and moved his war-horse deliberately at the swearing Drasdian. After one startled yelp, the man turned and fled. "What did he say?" Wolf asked Silk. "You were standing in front of him, so I couldn't see." "The whole region's alive with Murgos," Silk replied, climbing back on his horse. "Karen says that a dozen parties of them have been through here in the last week." "You knew that animal?" Sinedra demanded. "Karen? Of course, we went to school together." "Drasdians like to keep an eye on things, Princess," Wolf told her. "King Rodar has agents everywhere." "That awful man is an agent of King Rodar?" Sinedra asked incredulously. Silk nodded. "Actually, Karen's a Margrave," he said. "He has exquisite manners under normal circumstances. He asked me to convey his compliments." Sinedra looked baffled. "Drasnians talk to each other with their fingers," Garen explained. "I thought everybody knew that." Sinedra's eyes narrowed at him. What Karen actually said was, "Tell the red-haired wench that I apologize for the insult," Garen informed her smugly. He needed to talk to Silk, and he had to have an excuse. "Wench?" "His word, not mine," Garen replied quickly. "You know this sign language?" "Naturally." "That'll do, Garion," Aunt Paul said firmly. "Karen recommends that we get out of here immediately," Silk told Mr. Wolf. "He says that the Murgos are looking for somebody. Us, probably." From the far side of the camp, there were sudden angry voices. Several dozen Nadraks boiled out of their shanties to confront a group of Murgo horsemen who had just ridden up out of a deep gully. At the forefront of the Nadraks hulked a huge fat man who looked more animal than human. In his right hand he carried a brutal-looking steel mace. "Kordok!" he bellowed. "I told you I'd kill you the next time you came here!" The man who stepped out from among the Murgo horses to face the hulking Nadrak was Brill. "You've told me a lot of things, Tarlek," he shouted back. "This time you get what's coming to you, Kordok!" Tarlek roared, striding forward and swinging his mace. "Stay back!" Brill warned, stepping away from the horses. "I don't have time for this right now." "You don't have any time left at all, Kordok, for anything!" Beric was grinning broadly. "Would anyone like to take the opportunity to say goodbye to our friend over there?" he said. "I think he's about to leave on a very long journey." But Brill's right hand had dipped suddenly inside his tunic. With a flickering movement, he whipped out a peculiar-looking triangular steel object about 6 inches across. Then in the same movement, he flipped it, spinning and whistling, directly at Tarlek. The flat steel triangle sailed, flashing in the sun as it spun, and disappeared with a sickening sound of shearing bone into the hulking Nadrak's chest. Silk hissed with amazement. Tarlek stared stupidly at Brill, his mouth agape, and his left hand going to the spurting hole in his chest. Then his mace slid out of his right hand, his knees buckled, and he fell heavily forward. "Let's get out of here," Mr. Wolf barked. "Down the creek, go!" They plowed into the rocky stream bed at a plunging gallop, and the muddy water sprayed out from under their horses' hooves. After several hundred yards, they turned sharply to scramble up a steep gravel bank. "That way!" Beric shouted, pointing toward more level ground. Garion did not have time to think, only to cling to his horse and try to keep up with the others. Faintly, far behind, he could hear shouts. They rode behind a low hill and reined in for a moment at Wolf's signal. "Hedar," the old man said, "see if they're coming." Hedar wheeled his horse and loped up to a stand of trees at the brow of the hill. Silk was muttering curses, his face livid. "What's your problem now?" Beric demanded. Silk kept on swearing. "What's got him so worked up?" Beric asked Mr. Wolf. "Our friend's just had a nasty shock," the old man answered. "He misjudged somebody." "So did I, as a matter of fact. That weapon Brill used on the big Nadrak is called an adder sting." Beric shrugged. "It looks just like an odd-shaped throwing knife to me." "There's a bit more to it than that," Wolf told him. "It's as sharp as a razor on all 3 sides, and the points are usually dipped in poison. It's the special weapon of the Dagashi. That's what's got Silk so upset." "I should have known," Silk berated himself. "Brill's been a little too good all along to be just an ordinary Sandarian footpad." "Do you know what they're talking about, Polgara?" Beric asked. "The Dagashi are a secret society in Thalmergos," she told him. "Trained killers, assassins. They answer only to Tuchik and their own elders. Tuchik's been using them for centuries to eliminate people who get in his way. They're very efficient." "I've never been that curious about the peculiarities of Murgo culture," Beric replied. "If they want to creep around and kill each other, so much the better." He glanced up at the hill quickly to find out if Hedar had seen anything behind them. "That thing Brill used might be an interesting toy, but it's no match for armor and a good sword." "Don't be provincial, Beric," Silk said, beginning to regain his composure. "A well-thrown addersting can cut right through a mail shirt if you know how, and can even sail around corners. Not only that, a Dagashi could kill you with his hands and feet, whether you're wearing armor or not." He frowned. "You know, Belgarath," he mused, "we might have been making a mistake all along. We assumed that Asherak was using Brill, but it might have been the other way around. Brill has to be good, or Tuchik wouldn't have sent him into the west to keep an eye on us." He smiled then, a chillingly bleak little smile. I wonder just how good he is. He flexed his fingers. I've met a few Dagashi, but never one of their best. That might be very interesting. Let's not get sidetracked, Wolf told him. The old man's face was grim. He looked at Aunt Paul, and something seemed to pass between them. You're not serious, she said. I don't think we've got much choice, Paul. There are Murgos all around us, too many and too close. I don't have any room to move. They've got us pinned right up against the southern edge of Maragore. Sooner or later, we're going to get pushed out onto the plain anyway. At least if we make the decision ourselves, we'll be able to take some precautions. I don't like it, Father, she stated bluntly. I don't care much for it myself, he admitted, but we've got to shake off all these Murgos or we'll never make it to the Vale before winter sets in. Heder rode back down the hill. They're coming, he reported quietly, and there's another group of them circling in from the west to cut us off. Wolf drew in a deep breath. I think that pretty well decides it, Paul, he said. Let's go. As they passed into the belt of trees dotting the last line of hills bordering the plain, Garion glanced back once. A half-dozen dust clouds spotted the face of the mile-wide slope above them. Murgos were converging on them from all over the mountains. They galloped on into the trees and thundered through a shallow draw. Beric, riding in the lead, suddenly held up his hand. Men ahead of us, he warned. Murgos? Heder asked, his hand going to his saber. I don't think so, Beric replied. The one I saw looked more like one of those we saw back at the settlement. Silk, his eyes very bright, pushed his way to the front. I've got an idea, he said. Let me talk to them. He pushed his horse into a dead run, plunging directly into what seemed to be an ambush. Comrades, he shouted, get ready! They're coming, and they've got the gold! Several shabby-looking men with rusty swords and axes rose from the bushes or stepped out from behind the trees to surround the little man. Silk was talking very fast, gesticulating, waving his arms and pointing back toward the slope looming behind them. What's he doing? Beric asked. Something devious, I imagine, Wolf replied. The men surrounding Silk looked dubious at first, but their expressions gradually changed as he continued to talk excitedly. Finally, he turned in his saddle to look back. He jerked his arm in a broad overhead sweep. Let's go! He shouted. They're with us! He spun his horse to scramble up the graveled side of the gully. Don't get separated, Beric warned, shifting his shoulders under his mailed shirt. I'm not sure what he's up to, but these schemes of his sometimes fall apart. They pounded down through the grim-looking brigands and up the side of the gully on Silk's heels. What did you say to them? Beric shouted as they rode. I told them that 15 Murgos had made a dash into Maragore and came out with 3 heavy packs of gold, the little man laughed. Then I said that the men at the settlement had turned them back and that they were trying to double around this way with the gold. I told them that we'd cover this next gully if they'd cover that one back there. Those scoundrels will swarm all over Brill and his Murgos when they try to come through, Beric suggested. I know, Silk laughed. Terrible, isn't it? They rode on at a gallop. After about a half mile, Mr. Wolf raised his arms, and they all reined in. This should be far enough, he told them. Now listen very carefully, all of you. These hills are alive with Murgos, so we're going to have to go into Maragore. Princess Sinedra gasped, and her face turned deathly pale. It's all right, dear, Aunt Paul soothed her. Wolf's face was grimly serious. As soon as we ride out onto the plain, you're going to start hearing certain things, he continued. Don't pay any attention, just keep riding. I'm going to be in the lead, and I want you all to watch me very closely. As soon as I raise my hand, I want you to stop and get down off your horses immediately. Keep your eyes on the ground and don't look up, no matter what you hear. There are things out there that you don't want to see. Bulgaria and I are going to put you all into a kind of sleep. Don't try to fight us, just relax and do exactly what we tell you to do. Sleep? Mandaralin protested. What if we are attacked? How may we defend ourselves if we are asleep? There isn't anything alive out there to attack you, Mandaralin, Wolf told him, and it isn't your body that needs to be protected, it's your mind. What about the horses? Heder asked. The horses will be all right. They won't even see the ghosts. I can't do it, Sinedra declared, her voice hovering on the edge of hysteria. I can't go into Maragore. Yes, you can, dear, Aunt Paul said in that same calm, soothing voice.
Stay close to me, and I won't let anything happen to you." Geryon felt a sudden profound sympathy for the frightened little girl, and he drew his horse over beside hers. "I'll be here too," he told her. She looked at him gratefully, but her lower lip still trembled, and her face was very pale. Mr. Wolf took a deep breath and glanced once at the long slope behind them. The dust clouds raised by the converging Murgos were much closer now. "All right," he said, "let's go." He turned his horse and began to ride at an easy trot down the mouth of the gully and the plain stretching out before them. The sound, at first, seemed faint and very far away, almost like the murmur of wind among the branches of a forest or the soft babble of water over stones. Then, as they rode further out onto the plain, it grew louder and more distinct. Geryon glanced back once, almost longingly at the hills behind them. Then he pulled his horse close in beside Sinedra's and locked his eyes on Mr. Wolf's back, trying to close his ears. The sound was now a chorus of moaning cries, punctuated by occasional shrieks. Behind it all, and seeming to carry and sustain all the other sounds, was a dreadful wailing, a single voice surely, but so vast and all-encompassing that it seemed to reverberate inside Gerion's head, erasing all thought. Mr. Wolf suddenly raised his hand, and Geryon slid out of his saddle, his eyes fixed almost desperately on the ground. Something flickered at the edge of his vision, but he refused to look. Then Aunt Poll was speaking to them, her voice calm, reassuring. "I want you to form a circle," she told them, "and take each other's hands. Nothing will be able to enter the circle, so you'll all be safe." Trembling in spite of himself, Geryon stretched out his hands. Someone took his left. He didn't know who, but he instantly knew that the tiny hand that clung so desperately to his right was Sinedra's. Aunt Poll stood in the center of their circle, and Geryon could feel the force of her presence there, washing over all of them. Somewhere outside the circle he could feel Wolf. The old man was doing something that swirled faint surges through Geryon's veins, and set off staccato bursts of the familiar roaring sound. The wailing of the dreadful single voice grew louder, more intense, and Geryon felt the first touches of panic. It was not going to work. They were all going to go mad. "Hush now," Aunt Poll's voice came to him, and he knew that she spoke inside his mind. His panic faded, and he felt a strange, peaceful lassitude. His eyes grew heavy, and the sound of the wailing grew fainter. Then, enfolded in a comforting warmth, he fell almost at once into a profound slumber.